Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take stacks of sources, articles, research, and expert notes and distill them down to the essential, fascinating, and often surprising truths.
If you're looking for a shortcut to being truly well-informed, you are absolutely in the right place.
Our subject today is a place defined by, well, constant motion. It's a state that is often reduced to that simple moniker, the Sunshine State, but is in reality a complex geographical peninsula, a demographic pressure cooker, and a modern political battleground.
Of course.
We are, of course, taking a deep dive into Florida.
Florida is, I think, the perfect subject for this kind of deep analysis. It's so easy to stereotype it, based on theme parks or retirement communities.
Right.
But when you look at the raw data that we've gathered from its ancient geology to its modern political machine, you realize it's a state of profound, even you could say existential contrasts. So the mission today is to move beyond the tourist guides and really grasp the immense scale and the immediate fragility of Florida's identity.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start, I think, by defining the sheer physical and human scale of this state, because so much of its story just flows from its geography.
Exactly. Start with its aquatic position. I mean, Florida holds this singular distinction of being the only state in the U.S. that borders both the Gulf of Mexico
Which defines its western and southern shores.
and the powerful Atlantic Ocean to its east. When you look at its shape, that massive peninsula, it dictates everything.
And when we talk about that coastline, the magnitude is often, understated. Our sources confirm that Florida possesses the longest coastline in the entire contiguous United States.
Yeah, an astonishing 350 miles.
And that figure, importantly, doesn't even count the countless barrier islands and submerged landmasses.
Right.
So this means that Florida is a state fundamentally defined by its interface with the ocean, which, as we'll get into later, means immense economic opportunity.
But also immense liability. It
Yeah.
absolutely does. The geography dictates the economy and the vulnerability.
Right.
But the human scale of Florida is equally staggering, and it's constantly in flux. As of recent estimates, it is the third most populous state in the nation,
Over 23 million people.
over 23 million. And crucially, it ranks 7th overall in population density. This is not a sprawling, empty western state. This is a highly concentrated, densely developed environment, particularly along those waterlines.
And that density, combined with that geography, it explains why that seemingly simple concept, the Sunshine State, is such a powerful magnet. Climatically, Florida is one of the rarest continental states. It's the only one besides Hawaii to boast a true tropical climate.
Right, so specifically south of that massive land barrier, Lake Okeechobee.
Exactly. That tropical identity is a massive driver for the economy, for migration, and for the unique ecosystems we are going to explore.
So to summarize our foundation here, we're looking at a huge, densely populated, water-defined peninsula with a fundamentally tropical identity that is constantly negotiating the line between its permanent geological structure and its constantly shifting human population.
That's the complex foundation we need as we begin our deep dive into its centuries of conquest and conflict.
Let's do it.
So let's start at the very beginning. Florida's story is often, truncated to the last 500 years since European arrival, but our sources stress the deep antiquity of this land.
Right.
Paleo-Indians inhabited the region at least 14,000 years ago. This was a long-settled, sophisticated landmass.
That's critical context because it establishes what was lost. By the time the Spanish began their expeditions in the 16th century, there were several major indigenous civilizations thriving.
Okay.
You had the Appalachi, who dominated the rich agricultural lands of the Panhandle. The Timucua spanned the north and central regions, and the Calusa held the southwestern coast.
And the Calusa were a powerful maritime chiefdom, right?
Yeah.
Known for shell mounds and a really complex social structure.
Exactly. And here's where the historical data reveals a sharp, really tragic reality. The impact of European arrival, primarily through infectious disease, but also enslavement and warfare, was catastrophic.
How bad are we talking?
Population estimates for Native Americans in the 1520s suggest numbers as high as 700,000 across the peninsula.
700,000. Wow.
And then, less than 200 years later, by the year 1700, our sources indicate that number had plummeted to only around 2,000 people.
That's staggering. That is a near-complete demographic collapse.
It is. And while the diseases, smallpox, measles, did the greatest damage, the Hispanic system of missions and forced labor, alongside proxy wars funded by the English, completed the destruction of those major cultures.
What's fascinating here is that even the state's name is a direct reference to that initial European sighting, but it carries this sort of romantic air that really belies the conflict that followed.
Mhm.
Spanish explorer Juan Ponce de Leon sighted the peninsula in 1513, came ashore on April 3rd, and he named it La Florida.
Land of Flowers.
Right.
And that name was explicitly in recognition of the Easter season, which the Spanish call Pascua Florida.
This is a great opportunity to dismiss a myth, too.
The Fountain of Youth.
Yeah, the sources confirm that whole idea, that Ponce de Leon was specifically searching for the Fountain of Youth that didn't appear in print until decades after his death.
Right, he was on a mission of exploration and conquest, naming the territory for the abundant flora he saw and the religious season. It was much more practical than mythical.
Okay, moving forward into that early European footprint, St. Augustine is the landmark that anchors this history, established by the Spanish in 1565.
And it is the oldest continuously inhabited European established settlement in the continental United States. The longevity of this city really speaks to the Spanish determination to hold this territory against all challengers.
St. Augustine also offers a window into a colonial social structure that was fundamentally different from the one developing in the English colonies further north.
It does. We see this in a profoundly important historical data point. The first recorded Christian marriage in the continental U.S. took place there in 1565.
And it was between Luisa de Abrego, who was a free black domestic servant from Seville, and Miguel Rodriguez, a white Segovian.
Exactly. That detail really challenges the narrative of monolithic racial segregation that we often associate with North American colonial history.
It indicates a more integrated, though still highly stratified, society under the Spanish crown.
Right. For them, it seems conversion to Catholicism and loyalty to the crown were paramount, often regardless of race.
And this difference in colonial approach led directly to one of the most radical social experiments in North America.
You're talking about their policy towards escaped slaves.
Exactly. Unlike the English, the Spanish actively encouraged enslaved people to escape the 13 colonies and seek refuge in Florida. They offered freedom and Spanish citizenship.
In exchange for conversion to Catholicism and service in the Florida militia.
This policy was then formalized with the establishment of Fort Mose in 1738, just outside St. Augustine.
And Fort Mose wasn't just a temporary camp. It was the first legally sanctioned free black settlement in North America. It functioned as an armed black militia protecting the Spanish frontier against British encroachment.
Think about that for a moment. This was an official Spanish policy that completely inverted the entire racial and military dynamic of the region.
It created a frontier populated by armed, free black citizens facing off against the slaveholding power of the English colonies. It's incredible.
That dynamic meant Florida was a constant flashpoint, which eventually led to what the sources call the swap.
Following the 7 Years' War, Britain had captured Havana, Cuba, which was a massive economic prize. So in 1763, the Treaty of Paris ends the war.
And Spain cedes Florida to Britain in exchange for the British returning Havana.
Right. The Spanish population largely evacuated to Cuba, but the brief British period from 1763 to 1783 was highly impactful.
How so?
The British divided the territory into East and West Florida, and crucially, they used aggressive land grants to attract new settlers. They promoted cash crops like sugarcane and indigo.
And most significantly, they introduced English common law, right? Including trial by jury in county governments.
Yes, setting the stage for future American governance. And unlike the restless colonies to the north, the Floridas remained staunchly loyalist strongholds during the American Revolution.
After the British defeat, Spain regained both East and West Florida via the Treaty of Versailles in 1783, but their control was, well, fragile.
It was almost nominal. Spain was devastated by the Peninsular War at home and just lacked the resources to fund troops or settlers to hold the vast, unruly Florida frontier.
Against the relentless push of American expansionists moving south from Georgia and South Carolina.
And these American and Scots-Irish migrants, mixing with the existing British settlers, were the people who came to be known as the Florida Crackers, a mixed population that formed the backbone of the inland frontier.
So the territory was becoming a financial burden that Spain was eager to shed.
Which culminates in the Adams-Onis Treaty of 1821, where Spain cedes the entire territory to the United States. In return, the U.S. agreed to recognize Spanish sovereignty over Texas, a major point of negotiation at the time.
And Andrew Jackson, the future president, served briefly as the military commissioner for the new territory.
Right, and the city of Jacksonville is named in his honor. But the immediate result of American acquisition was the intensification of the policy of Indian removal.
This is the darkest chapter, and it really defines the eventual cultural identity of modern indigenous Florida.
It does. American settlers wanted the fertile land, particularly around the Panhandle and the northern interior. This led to the Seminole Wars, which stretched from 1816 to 1858.
Making them the longest and most extensive American Indian Wars in U.S. history?
The violence and expense were just staggering. The Second Seminole War from 1845 to 1842 stands out in the sources as the bloodiest war fought against Native Americans in U.S. history.
The U.S. spent immense sums and suffered thousands of casualties trying to clear the land.
And part of the brutality and difficulties stemmed from the unique relationship between the Seminoles and the black Seminoles escaped or free black people who lived among them.
So the U.S. Army was fighting not just to move indigenous people, but to destroy an independent sanctuary for black Americans. It adds this whole other layer of complexity to the conflict.
Absolutely. The ultimate goal was relocation to Indian Territory in Oklahoma, mandated by the Treaty of Payne's Landing in 1832.
But here's the detail that really resonates with that theme of independence. A few hundred Seminoles, refusing to surrender, managed to take refuge deep in the impenetrable swamps of the Everglades.
And that decision to retreat and hold out established a powerful legacy. They never formally signed a peace treaty or surrendered to the U.S. government, which fostered a culture of staunch independence that remains central to the Seminole and Miccosukee tribes today.
That's resilience forged in the most extreme environment.
For sure.
Against this backdrop of conflict, Florida was admitted as the 27th state in 1845, explicitly entering the Union as a slave state to maintain the political balance in Washington.
And the demographic situation on the eve of the Civil War was clear. By 1860, 44% of Florida's population was enslaved. Its allegiance was decided swiftly.
Florida seceded on January 10, 1861, becoming a founding member of the Confederacy.
Its direct military contribution was relatively small, about 15,000 troops sent to fight elsewhere. But its logistical support was absolutely crucial to the Confederate war effort.
How so? What was it providing?
Yes, Florida provided vital salt, which was essential for preserving food, but more critically, it provided beef.
Ah.
After the Union gained control of the Mississippi River in 1864, cutting off access to Texas beef, Florida's vast herds became indispensable to feeding the Confederate armies in the East.
So they were the supply line that kept the war going for that final year.
In many ways, yes. And the state saw important military action, primarily in defense of those supply lines. The sources highlight Confederate victories at the Battle of Olustee in 1864 and the Battle of Natural Bridge in 1865.
The war finally ended in 1865, but due to Reconstruction and all the political turmoil, Florida's congressional representation wasn't forcibly restored until 1868.
Right. So if we fast forward through that difficult Reconstruction era and the rise of Jim Crow, we see a Florida that remained peripheral, still recovering from the war and its internal conflicts. It wasn't yet the engine of the South.
That's a key piece of information. Surprisingly, Florida started the 20th century as the least populous southern state.
Yeah, only 528,542 residents in 1900. And nearly 44% of that population was African American, a proportion virtually unchanged since before the Civil War.
And this demographic reality led directly to a major outflow during the Great Migration.
It did. Roughly 40,000 black residents, about 1/5 of the black population at the time, left the state seeking better economic opportunities and, crucially, escaping the pervasive lynchings and racial violence that defined the Jim Crow South.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the narrative shifts dramatically after World War II.
Yep.
The post-WWII boom fundamentally transformed Florida's trajectory, leading to exponential growth. So what specific factors, beyond just the generic idea of sunshine, drove this massive migration, particularly from the freezing Rust Belt and the densely populated Northeast?
Our sources cite 3 specific intertwined factors that created this population magnet. First was the commercialization and widespread affordability of air conditioning.
Right. Before AC, the oppressive summer humidity made large-scale habitation and commerce almost untenable in the interior.
Exactly. Second was the reliably warm climate, which appealed heavily to retirees and those seeking a lifestyle change. And third, historically, was a comparatively low cost of living and the appeal of that no income tax structure, which we'll definitely discuss later.
That cocktail of factors, comfort, climate, and low tax, turned the spigot wide open.
It did.
This migration was so immense, so rapid, that in 2014, Florida surpassed New York State to become the 3rd most populous state in the entire U.S.
That is an unprecedented demographic transformation achieved in a single generation. It's Truly remarkable.
And this influx didn't spread evenly across the 65,000 square miles of the state. It's hyper-concentrated.
It is. The state is highly urbanized. 89% of residents lived in urban areas as of 2000. And critically, in 2012, 75% of the population lived within 10 miles of the coastline.
So the state, structurally, is a series of densely developed, fragile coastal strips wrapped around an uninhabited, often ecologically protected interior.
Exactly. And this perpetual massive influx of people has created a demographic reality that is essential to understanding modern Florida. It is a true mosaic, a melting pot in motion.
It officially became a majority-minority state in 2024, with the non-Hispanic white population now falling below half at 49.1%.
And that constant influx creates two enormous demographic distinctions that define the state. First, reflecting that retirement appeal, it's the oldest state in the U.S.
The highest percentage of people over 65, standing at 17.3%.
Right. Second, and this is perhaps the most important point for understanding its politics and culture, about 2/3 of Florida's entire population was born in another state or another country.
2/3.
That makes Florida second only to Nevada in the percentage of residents who are transplants.
That fact, that 2 out of every 3 people were born somewhere else, means Florida's identity is intrinsically transient. There is no shared, long-standing historical or political identity. It is constantly being shaped by external forces and the shifting allegiances of newcomers.
So let's break down the sources of that diversity, starting with the Hispanic and Latino population, which accounts for a substantial 26.5% of the state.
The Cuban-American community has historically been the foundational pillar, right? Deeply concentrated in Miami and Tampa, representing about 6.5% of the state.
Yes, and this community has a long-established history stretching back decades, profoundly influencing South Florida's financial and political character.
But the sources also highlight a massive, more recent and geographically distinct shift: the Puerto Rican population.
Right. Centered primarily around Orlando and Tampa, this group accounts for 4.5% of the population. And this is noted as the fastest-growing Puerto Rican population in the U.S.
Significantly boosted by mass migration following the devastation of Hurricane Maria in 2017.
Exactly. And this shift fundamentally altered the political dynamics of Central Florida. That critical I-4 corridor we'll cover later.
We also see a profound African and Afro-Caribbean influence, making up 16.0% of the population. What's fascinating here is the sheer diversity within that group.
It is. Florida hosts the largest West Indian population of any state, about 4.5% of the total state population, with Haitian Americans being the most numerous, particularly concentrated in Miami-Dade and Broward counties.
This linguistic diversity is the natural consequence of those population figures.
Of course, while the 1988 Constitution affirmed English as the official language, a substantial 27% of the population speaks a mother tongue other than English at home.
And Spanish is by far the most dominant non-English language, spoken by 20% of the population, leading to this really bilingual culture in many parts of the state.
Right. And moving beyond the people, this cultural blending has left a distinct mark on the built environment and the arts.
Architecturally, Florida is renowned. It holds the world's largest collection of Art Deco and streamlined modern buildings, concentrated, of course, in the Miami Beach Art Deco district.
That unique style, with its pastel colors, geometric forms, and neon, it cemented Miami's global identity as a resort destination in the 1920s and 30s.
And following World War II, as the population truly exploded, Florida developed its own distinctive post-war style. Miami Modern.
MIMO.
MIMO, exactly. This style is instantly recognizable for its dramatic curves, cantilevered roofs, and often whimsical use of color, reflecting the state's optimism and rapid expansion during that era.
And beyond the visual, the sheer sensory environment of Florida, the heat, the swamps, the ocean, the complex human interactions, it has attracted and inspired some of the most influential American literary figures.
Ernest Hemingway, his deep association with Key West, cemented his later career.
Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings, who wrote so vividly about the hardscrabble life of the Florida interior in the yearling.
And Tennessee Williams, who spent his final years in Key West. It seems the environment itself just fosters these powerful, dramatic stories.
It really does.
The intense concentration of people along the coast, which we just discussed, puts incredible stress on the most vulnerable part of Florida, its physical environment. So now we switch gears to talk about the physical state, and what we find is that Florida's most defining characteristics are also its greatest structural and environmental vulnerabilities.
The word flat doesn't even do the geology justice.
Yeah.
On average, Florida is quantitatively the flattest state in the U.S.,
It has the infamous distinction of having Britton Hill at a mere 344 feet above mean sea level as its highest point.
which is the lowest high point of any U.S. state. It's a landmass without any topographical defenses.
And that flat, low-lying geography is underpinned by something called the Florida Platform.
The entire peninsula is a porous plateau of karst limestone. Think of it as a giant, brittle sponge sitting on bedrock. This geological structure is the key to understanding Florida's fragility.
Why is that porosity so critical?
Well, that limestone structure is dissolved by water over time, which creates an extended, intricate system of underwater caves, conduits, sinkholes, and springs.
And Florida's fresh water supply for most residents is drawn from this porous underground system.
Exactly. This means that pollution in one area can immediately impact water quality across vast distances, connecting the fate of communities in a way you just don't see in states with solid bedrock.
And speaking of water, the scale of its surface water is enormous. Lake Okeechobee is the second largest natural freshwater lake, contained entirely within the contiguous 48 states.
Surpassed only by Lake Michigan. And the longest river, the St. Johns River, is 310 miles long, yet it drops less than 30 feet in elevation from its source to the Atlantic Ocean.
That near-total lack of elevation change defines the slow movement and easy flooding of the state.
And this unique geology also means surprising mineral wealth. Florida holds the largest deposits of potash and rock phosphate in the U.S., concentrated mostly in the Bone Valley region south of Lakeland.
And these minerals are vital for global fertilizer production, but their extraction poses significant local environmental risks.
For sure.
Let's talk about the climate, which defines the instability. Florida is, on average, the warmest state in the U.S., with an average daily temperature of 70.7 degrees Fahrenheit.
But that warmth comes with tremendous volatility. While it is the Sunshine State, it is also the lightning capital of the U.S.
Central Florida experiences more lightning strikes than anywhere else.
Right. And thanks to frequent, heavy afternoon thunderstorms from late spring through early autumn, it boasts the highest average precipitation levels of any state.
And when we connect that unstable weather to larger systems, Florida leads the entire U.S. in tornadoes per area,
including a high number of waterspouts forming over the coastal waters. But the existential threat, of course, is the hurricane.
Florida is undeniably the most hurricane-prone state in the country. To illustrate the extreme risk, 83% of all Category 4 or higher storms that have struck the U.S. have hit either Florida or Texas.
Wow. And since record-keeping began in 1851, Florida has been hit by 114 hurricanes, with 37 classified as major storms. It is a recurring, costly, and fundamentally defining natural risk.
We need to acknowledge the specific environmental treasures that are now most vulnerable to these climatic shifts.
The Florida Reef.
It's critical. It is the only living coral barrier reef in the continental U.S. and the third largest coral barrier reef system globally.
After the Great Barrier Reef and the Belize Barrier Reef, this is an enormous, delicate underwater city supporting almost 1,400 species of marine life.
Over 40 species of stony corals and 500 species of fish. The health of this reef isn't just an ecological concern. It's a massive economic driver for tourism and fishing.
It is. And that fragility is mirrored on land, where the state's iconic fauna faces severe human-driven pressure. The endangered Florida panther population.
And what's fascinating and tragic is that the main cause of mortality for the Florida panther is automobile collisions. So the rapid expansion of roads and human development, cutting through what little remains of their natural habitat in the Everglades, is literally running them over.
Yeah. Likewise, manatees are dying at rates higher than their reproduction, largely due to habitat destruction and boat strikes.
Adding to this complexity is the problem of non-native species. Our sources indicate Florida has accumulated over 1,500 non-native animal species.
The Burmese python, which is capable of eating alligators and deer, and the green iguana, which destroys native plant life. They're the most prominent examples. They threaten native species by eating them and outcompeting them for resources.
The fight to control these invaders is just an endless, expensive war.
It is. And here's where the high population density and the porous geology converge into critical existential threats.
Red tide.
Red tide and algae bloom frequently affects the southwest coast, killing marine wildlife, fish, and devastating coral reefs. And while some level of red tide is natural, the scale and frequency have been linked to increased nutrient runoff from human activity in agriculture.
And given that the state is so flat, much of it has an elevation of less than 12 feet. Rising sea levels associated with global warming are an immediate and critical threat.
We aren't talking about future generations. We're seeing the impact now. The sources detail how the Atlantic beaches, which are vital to Florida's tourism economy, are rapidly washing out to sea.
And coastal towns like Miami Beach are running out of accessible offshore sand reserves to pump onto the shore for restoration.
Right. And the warmer waters are also accelerating coral bleaching on the Florida Reef, turning these vibrant ecosystems ghostly white and killing the underlying polyps.
And finally, remember that karst limestone platform we discussed?
Sinkholes.
Sinkholes are a major active geological hazard. Claims for sinkhole damage on property exceeded $2 billion just between 2006 and 2010.
So the state is literally dissolving from underneath itself while the oceans rise around it. It's a conflict between geological permanence and climate-driven transience.
Despite the staggering environmental risks we just detailed, Florida is a colossal economic force that shows no signs of slowing down. Let's talk scale. Florida's gross state product, or GSP, stood at $1.647 trillion in 2024, making it the fourth largest state economy in the U.S.
That number requires global context. If Florida were a sovereign nation, its economy would rank as the 15th largest globally, placing it between major nations like South Korea and Spain.
This isn't just a wealthy state. It's a globally significant economic powerhouse built on diversification, low taxes, and those attractive coastlines.
The most famous sector, of course, is tourism, which generates hundreds of billions annually. Walt Disney World, for example, is the largest single-site employer in the entire U.S.
And its Magic Kingdom is consistently the world's most visited theme park.
But that's just the anchor. The entire tourism ecosystem, beaches, nautical recreation, cruise lines, and other parks like the Universal Complex, drives this massive industry.
But if you remove tourism, Florida is still an agricultural giant.
Oh yeah. It is the #1 grower in the U.S. for oranges, specifically the kind used for juice fresh tomatoes, sugar, sweet corn, and green beans.
The sheer scale of its citrus and sugar production gives it an outsized role in the national food supply, though the citrus industry is currently fighting some serious disease threats.
It is. We also have to look at the new economy. Miami has evolved far beyond just tourism. Its Brickell Financial District now holds the largest concentration of international banks in the United States.
Which cements its role as a key gateway for Latin American finance.
Exactly. And we're seeing rapid growth in technology sectors, particularly in finance, fintech, and specialized defense technology across Miami, Orlando, and Tampa.
And let's not forget the crucial, long-standing aerospace sector centered on the Space Coast around Cape Canaveral.
The history of NASA and defense spending has been the bedrock of Florida's high-tech manufacturing and engineering workforce for decades. Now, with the rise of private space ventures like SpaceX and Blue Origin, that sector is experiencing a massive resurgence.
This massive, multifaceted economic machine relies on equally massive infrastructure. Let's start with the transportation networks that move these 23 million people and their goods.
Florida ranks third nationally in gasoline consumption, burning through 21 million gallons daily, behind only California and Texas. This reliance on personal vehicles is a key piece of the infrastructure puzzle.
Especially since much of the state's revenue, derived from sales tax, hinges on consumer activity driven by travel.
Right. The primary arteries are essential to understand the state's flow. The I-4 corridor is perhaps the most famous, bisecting the state from Tampa through Orlando to Daytona Beach.
And it is crucial not just for traffic, but for commerce.
Then you have I-75 running north-south, dramatically cutting across the Everglades via the Alligator Alley toll road. I-95 hugs the Atlantic coast, the main conduit linking the entire eastern seaboard, and the Florida Turnpike provides another critical high-speed cross-state toll route.
The reliance on cars comes with major societal costs. The sources indicate that Florida motorists have one of the highest rates of car insurance in the U.S.
Right, due to dense traffic and high fraud rates, something we'll touch on later. Adding to the risk, a staggering 24% of drivers are uninsured.
A quarter of all drivers. In connecting back to our demographic discussion, there are striking differences in accident rates across age groups. Drivers aged 15-19 average 364 crashes a year per 10,000 licensed drivers, while drivers 70 and older averaged only 95 per 10,000.
That's a significant disparity that challenges some assumptions about driver age and risk profile, particularly in the oldest state in the U.S.
Beyond the road network, Florida is a critical logistical hub for global trade and travel. Port Miami is recognized as the world's largest passenger port.
The engine of the global cruise industry. For air travel, Orlando International Airport, MCO, is the busiest airport in the state, driven by the theme park economy.
Inner-city movement is undergoing a transformation, too. While Amtrak provides necessary north-south connections, with Sanford being the southern terminus of the vital auto train, the truly interesting development is Brightline.
This is a private, higher-speed diesel-electric rail system connecting Miami and Orlando, offering a viable alternative to the perpetual traffic jams on I-95 and the Turnpike.
When it comes to local transit, though, Miami stands alone.
It does. It is home to the state's only heavy rail rapid transit system, Metrorail, supplemented by the free elevated downtown people mover, Metromover.
Other major cities like Orlando, Tampa, and Jacksonville rely on less developed systems, often relying on buses or smaller automated people movers, reinforcing the state's core identity as a car-dependent landscape.
So we've established Florida's massive population, colossal economy, and immense fragility. Now let's turn to how this complex, dynamic place is governed.
Starting with the structure that fuels its migration, its unique tax system.
What's fascinating here is that Florida is one of only 8 states that does not impose a personal income tax. This is perhaps the single most powerful draw for high net worth individuals and businesses relocating from high-tax states.
But every government has to collect revenue. So the state government's primary revenue source is the sales tax.
Yes. While cities and counties rely almost entirely on property tax.
This creates a specific vulnerability, doesn't it? Reliance on sales tax means the state's budget is highly dependent on consumer spending and tourism.
Absolutely. When economic downturns or, say, global pandemics hit, state revenue is immediately and disproportionately affected.
And conversely, the heavy reliance on property tax at the local level puts immense pressure on localized property values, fueling the housing affordability crisis that constantly chases away the essential service workers.
Exactly.
Moving to the legal landscape, we mentioned the high cost of auto insurance. One specific structural law has been cited as a major catalyst for this: the 1972 Mandatory Personal Injury Protection, or PIP, no-fault auto insurance law.
The intention of PIP was to speed up payments for injuries, regardless of who's at fault. However, the ease with which payments could be obtained, often without rigorous proof of injury, created a massive opportunity for organized fraud.
In 2011, auto insurance fraud in Florida was estimated at close to $1 billion.
$1 billion. The highest in the U.S., heavily centered in the Miami-Dade and Tampa areas.
And we aren't talking about small individual claims here. This involved highly coordinated fraudulent pain clinics that were billing insurance companies for treatments never rendered.
Right, often involving staged accidents and complicit medical professionals. That billion-dollar fraud figure shows the deep structural cost of this particular legal landscape.
On the criminal justice front, Florida retains the death penalty, utilizing methods of execution that include both the electric chair and lethal injection.
Furthermore, the state's sentencing statutes are quite strict, requiring felons to serve at least 85% of their imposed sentence.
Okay, now let's dedicate some serious attention to the political journey Florida has taken, because it has gone from being the quintessential swing state to something entirely different in a remarkably short period.
Florida had a long history as the ultimate bellwether. From 1996 all the way through 2016, every presidential candidate who won Florida also won the general election.
It was the nation's political crystal ball.
It was. And the election that cemented Florida's critical importance on the national stage was, of course, the 2000 presidential race between George W. Bush and Al Gore.
The outcome was famously determined by a margin of only about 500 votes, decided after weeks of recounts and legal battles that ultimately went to the Supreme Court in Bush v. Gore.
The fallout from that close race was immense, and it involved deep examination of voting access. A 2002 study concluded that if the state's 827,000 disenfranchised felons
who were unable to vote due to the state's harsh felony disenfranchisement law at the time,
if they had been able to vote at the same rate as other Floridians, Democratic candidate Al Gore would have won the state and the presidency by more than 80,000 votes.
Wow. That study highlighted the dramatic structural political consequences of that one specific law.
It really did. Historically, the key to unlocking Florida's vote was always the central region, the I-4 corridor.
Stretching from Daytona Beach through Orlando to Tampa. This region contains 40% of the state's voters and was traditionally seen as the merging point between the liberal South, Miami-Dade, and the conservative North.
It was the ultimate swing area that decided statewide outcomes.
However, the bellwether streak was broken in 2020 when Donald Trump won Florida but lost the general election.
But the real shift occurred in the 2022 election, which saw an unexpectedly large margin of victory for the Republican candidate statewide. This led many pundits to conclude that Florida was no longer a perennial swing state.
But had transitioned into a reliably red state.
Exactly. And this transition was codified by demographics. In November 2021, for the first time in Florida's history, the total number of registered Republican voters officially exceeded the number of registered Democrats.
This political transience reflects the underlying human transience we discussed, that two-thirds transplant population is constantly bringing new political dynamics and allegiances that are rapidly shifting the state's identity.
Right. And finally, let's look at the education landscape, which is currently an area of intense societal hotspots. It's a contradiction.
It really is. On the one hand, Florida has high marks for quality. Its K-12 system was recently ranked third best nationally, and its higher education system, including institutions like the University of Florida, was ranked first.
And the system also charges some of the lowest tuition rates in the U.S. for four-year programs.
But the sources also detail major, high-profile controversies regarding curriculum and instruction that are causing national headlines. We have to reconcile that high ranking with these, well, restrictive political policies.
Indeed. We see several detailed policies that reflect the state's political atmosphere directly impacting the classroom. First, the administration blocked the offering of an advanced placement African American studies course,
citing concerns about compliance with state curriculum restrictions.
Right. Second, there have been widely reported restrictions placed on the teaching of certain works of literature, including Shakespearean plays, specifically due to the need to comply with state laws regarding sexual content in educational materials.
So these policies force teachers to significantly modify classic literature just to adhere to strict guidelines.
Yes, and perhaps the most controversial detail we found involves curriculum materials approved for public schools. The state-approved public school curriculum videos produced by the conservative advocacy group PragerU.
Okay, and these videos include segments suggesting that global warming occurs naturally.
And, astonishingly, liken climate change skeptics to those who fought communism and Nazism.
That inclusion of material, particularly on a politically charged topic like climate science, highlights the profound tension. A state with a first-rate educational infrastructure, simultaneously engaging in intense curriculum debates and content restrictions based on political directives.
It really reflects the intense polarization that has taken root in this former bellwether state.
This deep dive into Florida has shown us that the Sunshine State is a place of perpetual negotiation. It's a landmass that has been continuously conquered, developed, dissolved, and rebuilt, physically and demographically.
Just reflecting on some of the most surprising insights.
Yeah.
It has the lowest high point of any U.S. state at Britton Hill.
It hosted the first legally sanctioned free black settlement in North America at Fort Mose in 1738. A radical inversion of colonial policy.
Its GSP is larger than the entire national economy of Spain, and it has transitioned from being the quintessential swing state to a politically red state in just a few short years, driven by that transient population.
Florida is fundamentally defined by that theme of transience versus permanence, the ancient, dissolving geological structure contrasting with the constantly moving human population and the rapidly shifting political tides.
This raises an important question for you, the listener, to mull over. Given that two-thirds of Florida's population was born elsewhere, making it highly transient and lacking a shared generational history.
And given the severe existential threats the state faces, from rapidly rising sea levels, more intense hurricanes, and structural instability from sinkholes.
How will this constantly growing, constantly changing population unify and agree on the long-term governance and funding necessary to protect the very coastline and stability that defines its enormous economy?
It is the ultimate conflict between short-term demographic and economic momentum and long-term environmental survival. A fascinating, essential conflict, and a great place to end our deep dive into the state of Florida. Thank you for joining us.